好，现在已经9点了，OK，那我们就开始今天的讲座。今天我会用2种语言给大家介绍我们的嘉宾还有出版社。然后我首先介绍一下我自己，我是投币德学术的创办人和那个负责人，现在我叫张宁。然后我们这次讲座一共有5次讲座，是那个 Peer Review Week，也就是中文叫同行评议周的一部分。我首先介绍一下同行评议周。同行评议周是每年一次的全球活动，旨在宣传同行评议在保持科学质量方面发挥的重要作用。今年的主题是信任同行评议。今天的报告我们是面向中国和国外的用户同时直播，大概持续1个半小时。首先是由 Annual Review 的总裁兼总编辑 Dr. Richard Gallagher 为我们做报告，然后投币德培训部的负责人 Gary Stack 和Richard Gallagher 进行互动交流，然后回答大家的问题。我们也会你们在这个听的过程中有什么问题，可以把问题打在那个小鹅通或者是 Webinar Jam 上，然后我们会把问题转达给Richard 和 Gareth。Okay, I will repeat in English. Welcome to the first in our series of Peer Review Week webinars organized by TopEdit Author Services. My name is Ning Zhang, the founder and the CEO of TopEdit. Our webinar series comprises 5 events, all part of our contribution of a global peer review week events. The theme of this week is trust in peer review. Thanks for joining us. Our guest speaker today, Dr. Richard Gallagher, will give his presentation in a moment, and then we will have time for a discussion at the end. Feel free to ask any questions throughout this webinar by typing them into chat box. Okay, next I will introduce annual reviews in Chinese. Annual Reviews 是一家非盈利学术出版公司，在中国也是知名度很高。它成立于1932年，也就是历史十分悠久。出版社他们出版51本关于生命、生物医学、物理和社会科学的综述期刊。在期刊引证报告中，有13种期刊在各自然类别中排名第一。影响因子最大的期刊包括 Annual Reviews of Astronomy and Astrophysics，还有 Annual Review of Biochemistry。他们计划在2020年出版的五种期刊中，以一种称为订阅开放的新模式进行开放式出版。从2017年以来 ，Annual Reviews 通过网络版的 Knowledgeable Magazine 和 Shoot of Science 平台增加了一项科学新闻倡议。Okay, I will repeat in English. Sorry. Annual Reviews is a non-profit academic publishing company founded in 1932. It published 51 journals in the life, biomedical, physical, and social sciences. 13 annual reviews journals are ranked first in their respective categories by the journal citation reports. Each journals with their greatest impact factors include their annual reviews of astronomy and astrophysics and the annual review of biochemistry. The 2020 volume of 5 journals are scheduled to be published open access under a new business model called Subscribe to Open. Since 2017, annual reviews have added a science journalism initiative through the online publication of a knowledgeable magazine and the platform short of science. 下面我介绍一下咱们今天的演讲嘉宾Dr. Gallagher。Dr. Gallagher 是Annual Review 的总裁兼总编辑。他拥有苏格兰格拉斯哥大学细胞生物学的博士学位。他曾经担任英国剑桥欧洲科学办公室的办公室主任和高级编辑，然后加入英国伦敦的 Nature 杂志担任首席科学家编辑。在那里，他管理描述人类基因组测序的论文的出版。2001年，他后来被任命为 Nature 杂志的发行人。后来他搬到美国宾夕法尼亚州的Philadelphia，然后成为Scientist 杂志的编辑和发行人。在2015年加入 Annual Reviews。Okay, I will repeat in English. Dr. Richard Gallagher is the president and editor-in-chief of Annual Reviews. Richard has a PhD from the Department of Cell Biology at Glasgow University, Scotland. On moving to publishing, he serves as office head and senior editor for the Europe Office of Science in Cambridge, England, before joining Nature in London, England, as the chief biology editor, where he managed the publication of the papers describing the sequencing of the human genome in 2001. He was later appointed publisher of Nature before moving to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to become editor and publisher of the Scientist magazine. He joined the Annual Reviews in 2015. 今天 Dr. Gallagher 的演讲的题目是 Writing Narrative Reviews. Today, Dr. Gallagher will give us a talk, Writing Narrative Reviews. Richard, you can start. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ning, for that great introduction. Ni hao, good morning, everyone. It's early morning for me in San Francisco, but I understand that there are people from all different places around the world. So whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, thank you very much for participating in this event. It's a privilege and a pleasure for me to talk to you about reviews, but let me start by acknowledging the disadvantage that non-English native speakers have in communicating science, and noting the importance of organizations like TopEdit that can help to minimize this disadvantage. It's important that the review literature, as well as the primary research literature, is representative of the expertise and perspectives of researchers from all over the world. So I hope that many of you will write a review article at some point in your careers, and maybe this can help to generate your interest in doing that. Now, let me start with my slides. I'll share my screen. I hope that works. And the first slide is just the title, Writing Narrative Reviews. And this presentation, I'm thankful to Ning and TopEdit Author Services for the opportunity. This is a summary of what I'll cover. I'll explain what reviews do, compare two types of reviews, namely narrative reviews and systematic reviews, describe the characteristics of a good narrative review, touch on why you might want to be the author of the review, and if you do, when to write it and where to publish it. I will give you my tips for writing and finish off, if I have time, with some information on the company that I work for, Annual Reviews. Please do feel free to send questions in during the talk. Unfortunately, because of the way that my screen is set up, I won't be able to see them, but perhaps Gareth or Ning could interrupt me if there are questions. So I want to start off with what a review article does. The vast majority of research articles are primary papers. They report on a small number of experiments and observations in great detail, describing how the work was performed, presenting the data that was gathered, analysing it, and interpreting it. Reviews, in contrast, integrate the findings of many, sometimes hundreds of research papers. They present a fuller picture. Let me illustrate this through art. Here's a painting of a foundry worker, and here is the full picture. Actually, this is one of 27 murals by the Mexican artist Diego Rivera in a series called Detroit Industry, created in the early 1930s. And you can see right at the center of the major panel there, the foundry worker is in place. Here's another example, a man perhaps guarding some piles of wood, and the fuller image is Bruegel's Tower of Babel, painted in 1563. A third example is this beautiful image of a young man. In the full painting, the image is contained within the tears of a mother, a grief-stricken mother, following the murder of her son. So reviews provide the big picture, integrating lots of small images into a full sense of a story. In the case of our topic, science, it presents and integrates the findings from primary research. The goal of all reviews is to summarize the current understanding of a topic, but there are different ways to do a review, called systematic and narrative reviews. And here are some of the different features. Systematic reviews tend to be focused on a particular, often quite narrow subject. They are comprehensive. They assess all of the relevant literature on one topic, and they do it in a very objective manner. Typically, a systematic review deals with quantitative research and often provides statistical analysis of data sets from numerous papers. This meta-analysis provides new understanding of a topic. Systematic reviews are often written by teams, and areas where they're especially useful are healthcare or public health research or environmental analysis, often topics that are related to policy making. They offer a powerful way to translate multiple strands of research into best practice. Narrative reviews, which are going to be the focus of my comments here, have a different remit. They are more exploratory around the topic, and they tend to set the work in a wider intellectual context. They may have a more conversational tone, and although they are thorough, they can be somewhat selective and emphasize the most highly significant contributions to a field. You will often get the insights into the author's views and ideas about the field, which can be particularly useful if the author is very clever or a critical thinker, although these personal views should be clearly indicated. They may also include theory or a discussion of methods in a narrative review. So the purpose of a narrative review is more to build a knowledge base for further research, something that's relevant to any field of study, of course. I don't see the two approaches of systematic and narrative reviews as being competitive. Instead, they really complement one another. Sometimes a systematic review is needed, and sometimes a narrative review. So what does a good narrative review provide for the reader? It provides 4 different services. It captures current understanding of a topic, including what's well supported and what's controversial. As we all know, it's important to distinguish what's known with some certainty from knowledge that's more tentative. and reviews present this difference. Secondly, a good review sets the work in historical context. Everyone has a much greater appreciation of a scientific field, in fact, of any subject at all, if they have an idea how it arose and how it developed through different stages to get to the present day. So the historical aspect is crucial. Third, a good review doesn't just describe what we know, but it sets out what we don't know, describing the major questions that have not yet been answered helps to set the course for future study in upcoming years. And fourthly, a good review lays out what a field can contribute to the acquisition of knowledge, the practical applications, and the general significance of research to society needs to be explained at this big picture level. These four components make reviews crucial evaluations and summaries of our knowledge of ourselves, of our planet, and of our universe. That's fine, but why would a researcher choose to devote a large amount of his or her time to writing a review? I think that there are two main reasons to write a review. One is service to your community. Reviews are needed by researchers who want to stay up to date with their field and to integrate new information into their own studies. Reviews are also important to researchers who want an introduction to a new field. Maybe they've got a view to developing an interface between different areas of research. Students at all levels want to gain an understanding of topics and need reviews to do so. And policymakers, people in business, journalists, practitioners of all kinds, patients and patient advocates, and many others, members of the wide general public, for instance, want to be informed about developments in research. So writing a review provides a service to all of these different groups. The second reason to write a review is personal benefit. If you want to write a review, you must read and organize your thoughts on a huge amount of science, and that will make you a better researcher. It will also help your profile. Generally, reviews are more widely read than the primary literature, and they have a long shelf life, so people will be coming back to read the review for many years to come. They are often very well cited. So writing a review can raise your profile within the scientific community. Let's say you're interested in writing a review article. When should you do it, and where should you publish it? There needs to be a critical mass of new results and ideas for you to write a review. If there's too little, there's no need for a review. But if you leave it too late, then someone else may already have taken the opportunity. So you have to find the right time to write a review. For a narrative review, it's useful for you as the author to add something of value from your experience, your insight. I therefore suggest that you should spend quite a number of years in a particular research area before you write a review article. Also, to contribute a really valuable review, you have to do a great amount of reading and summarizing. This takes a lot of time, so you need to have a position where you can devote that time. Where should you publish a review is a matter of personal taste. Almost all journals, including multidisciplinary ones like Nature and Science, where I've worked, publish good reviews. And there are review-only journals and magazines as well. But essentially, almost all primary research journals would consider a review. You should spend time looking for the journals that publish the length and style of review that you would like to write, and then carefully follow their instructions for authors. If I wanted to write a review, I would prepare a thorough outline with section headings and a 2-sentence summary of each section, along with a cover letter that makes the case for why a review is needed and why I am the right person to do it. Some journals, such as our own annual reviews, are invitation only, and you shouldn't submit a full article to journals like that. You should submit a proposal. If you would like my advice on what I think makes a good narrative review, here it is. Some of this might be a little bit controversial, but I feel that scientific articles are often a little bit dreary and difficult to read. If an article is easy to read, and dare I say it, if it's a little bit enjoyable, I think it will get a lot more attention. So to achieve this, to make articles interesting and enjoyable, for the opening couple of paragraphs, imagine that you are explaining to someone, let's say at a party, who's not a scientist, but who's interested in science. Explain to them what excites you about your field and what makes the findings in your field of wide potential interest and of importance. What are the opportunities that the field presents? If you can explain this, and indeed, if you can write the whole article in short, simple sentences, that's definitely best. You should avoid jargon wherever you can, and where you do need to use complex language, you should give a full explanation of what you mean and not assume that the reader understands the topic as well as you do. The title can often be an invitation to read or a barrier to read. I think a fairly short title, perhaps a single clause, although that might be too limiting, is best. For example, I would be drawn to read an article that had the title Cultural Evolution in Animals, but I would be less inclined to read a more detailed title, such as Understanding the Mechanisms and Consequences of the Evolution of Transmission of Behavior through Social Learning in Animals. That long title is simply an over-complex way of saying cultural evolution in animals. All reviews benefit from having overview figures. These are really important for reviews for several reasons. One is that our brains respond to visual information, so figures and illustrations really do aid in the understanding of difficult concepts. And good figures are often used by other people in their presentations or coursework, which increases the value of your review, and it increases the usage of it, and therefore increases your profile. When you're writing a review, check if the journal employs illustrators, as annual reviews does, in which case you can focus on a fairly basic figure that presents your idea, and the illustrator will work with you to make a beautiful execution. In addition, I suggest that you include tables, sidebars, bulleted lists. These multiple summaries and entry points into an article make it much easier to understand and make it much more satisfactory to browse. You're finding the information repeated in multiple ways. One of the lists could, for instance, be major issues that remain to be addressed or the foreseeable next steps. One section could be a summary of what the work means for wider society, giving the applications and the implications of the work. One of the benefits of reading a review rather than a research paper is that you get the author's point of view and the author's philosophy. This should not be overdone. It needs to be carefully and clearly labeled as an opinion alongside the alternative explanations to that opinion. But I like authors to capture the excitement and fascination of science and the satisfaction that they get from solving complex problems and creating new knowledge. Science is a human activity, and we don't get enough of that coming across in the primary research. So I think it's good in the review literature to include some feeling and some sense of the fascination and awe of being involved in science. And you should think about including some of that in what you write. Let me say a little bit about how we work at annual reviews. Oh, I've skipped some slides here. So let me say a little bit about how we work at annual reviews. I will start with how topics and authors are selected. Each of our 51 journals has a committee comprising an editor or 2 co-editors and 8 or 9 members of the committee. Each member of the committee is a specialist in some aspect, some sub aspect of the discipline. These 10 people who come from different parts of the world meet once every year, always in person until this year. This year, the meetings, you won't be surprised to hear, have been on Zoom. They spend the full day, sometimes 2 days, discussing the field and coming to a consensus on important topics that should be reviewed. So for example, today is the meeting of annual review of environment and resources, and it started about an hour ago. And when I'm finished on this webinar, I'm going to go and join that meeting, and we'll spend the rest of the day talking about interesting topics on the environment and resources and how they should best be used. So the committee will spend 2 days actually discussing their field and coming to a consensus on what the important topics are in that field. They'll also decide on who would be the right person to write the review on each topic. We will then invite those people to contribute. And even though we ask leading researchers who have very busy schedules and tons of commitments, the acceptance rate for annual reviews is very high. Why is that? It's partly because it's an honor to be recognized by the research community for this task. And as I've said, it's a service to the community to provide the best possible review. But also, perhaps in a small way, it secures the author's place in the history of science if they write a prominent review. We give our authors a full year to write the article, and we give them the best editorial services, including a dedicated copy editor and an illustrator. And the articles are, of course, peer reviewed before publication. This focus on identifying topics that are right for the review, getting leading contributors to write them, taking care and working to improve them, means that our publications have a very long shelf life. They are read and referenced not over years, but over decades, and they help to define the current status of the field and its future directions. I mentioned the long shelf life, but let me describe the impact of annual reviews. And this is somewhat typical of reviews in general, and I'll use impact factors. I want to acknowledge that impact factors are a useful shorthand, but it's important not to overinterpret them. As I'm sure you know, impact factor is calculated by dividing the number of times articles were cited by the number of articles that are citable in a 2-year period. We publish 51 journals that cover the life sciences, the biomedical sciences, agriculture, the physical sciences, social sciences, and economics. Altogether, we publish about 1,200 review articles a year, and they cover everything from astronomy and astrophysics to virology and vision science. From the Journal Citation Report for 2019, published by Clarivate, 17 of our journals were ranked number 1 in a field, 11 were ranked number 2, 7 were ranked number 3, 8 were ranked number 4, 3 were ranked number 5, and 5 were ranked number 6. If we look at this is a 2-year impact factor. If we look at the 5-year or the 10-year impact factor, the position of annual reviews is even stronger. This is quite an extraordinary situation for a company that's as small as Annual Reviews. For instance, Springer Nature has roughly the same number of journals ranked #1 in their category, but as a company, they're about 100 times larger than Annual Reviews. So reviews really do perform very well in terms of citations. Another way to look at, excuse me, another way to look at the impact is to assess authorship. For example, articles by Nobel Prize winners. Since the beginning of the Nobel Prizes in 1901, 716 have been awarded in the sciences, that is physiology and medicine, chemistry, physics, and economic sciences. Of these 716, 261 of the winners have written one or more times for an Annual Reviews journal. That's 36%. And considering that Annual Reviews wasn't founded until 1932, I think it's quite an extraordinary record. As a final word about this, I'd like to offer this quote from the noted astrophysicist Sandra Faber, who has actually served as co-editor of Annual Reviews of Astronomy and Astrophysics. She says that Annual Reviews is the most compact, accessible, and usable archive of the intellectual history of the sciences and social sciences in the world. She also described it as a milestone of human intellectual achievement. So just to finish a little bit about our company, what we do and why we do it. We're strange because all of our efforts are given only to reviews. No other publisher specializes in this way. We're run as a non-profit company. In other words, we are a charity. Our products are priced to cover the cost, not to help shareholders and investors. We're there for the academic community and for the libraries. The organization is run for scientists, by scientists, and it has been since it was started in 1932. That means that we've got a very good understanding of the needs of the research community and of students, and we're not distracted by alternative business activities. It's a small organization, just 90 members of staff, and we have very transparent finances. If you want to know what we earned and what we spent, it's very easy to find out. That's unusual for any company and quite unusual for a publishing company. We think of the libraries and the research community as our partners. So we want to hear from you, we want to work with you, and I think that we share the same values as researchers and librarians. And as Ling said at the beginning, we also publish a free digital magazine called Knowable Magazine, which covers all kinds of science in a very interesting way, and I encourage you to read it. So the mission of our organization is we're a non-profit publisher dedicated to synthesizing and integrating knowledge for the progress of science and the benefit of society. I hope that you will read and learn from Annual Reviews articles. And as I said, I also hope that you'll consider writing a review in your subject to help your colleagues and to help other members of society better understand science. So I'll leave it there and happy to take questions. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Richard. And I hope everybody can hear me on the multiple different platforms that we're using for our presentation today. My name's Gareth Dyke. I'm in charge of education at TopEdit Author Services. And that was, I think, a very useful, informative presentation, especially for our colleagues around the world who are non-native English speakers, as Richard said in his presentation. I was really happy to hear like a number of things that we always talk about in our training, such as keep your title short, keep your message as interesting as possible. So these are key ways to get your work through that peer review stage and get it out and get it considered by editors for publication. We've got a number of questions, Richard. I don't know if you can see the
I can see the questions.
Chat box.
Sure.
Those are some of the questions that came in. I'm sure that our Chinese audience has questions also. So I guess the first one is about just reiterating the difference between the two kinds of reviews that you talked about in your presentation.
So systematic review is what it sounds like. It's taking all the relevant information that you can, usually data, and reanalyzing it to find out what the fuller picture is. So if you've got a drug for which there have been 5 independent clinical trials, and you want to integrate the findings from those 5 trials, you would do a narrative review, and you would do a meta-analysis of all the data from the different clinical trials and see if you can find what the most appropriate conclusions from those 5 trials together is, rather than looking at each one separately. So systematic reviews are a really good way of integrating slightly data sets from slightly different types of experiments like clinical trials in order to arrive at the most likely set of conclusions. That's very useful if you're doing something that's of practical value. You're trying to work out whether, let's say, a drug is effective against a particular type of cancer, which type of cancer, which population, and so on. Integrating the results from across numerous trials in different circumstances in different parts of the world is very important. And that's where systematic reviews are really helpful. A narrative review, on the other hand, is more aimed at, as you've said, educational aspects of science. It's aimed at bringing together what we understand today about a particular topic and what we don't understand, and presenting it in a way that allows people to see the big picture, rather than, as I showed at the beginning, just a tiny area of the subject, a little bit of a painting. We want to see the entire picture, and a review is intended to do that. But it's also intended to try and tell us something about how science is done, and how science should be done, and what happened to make to get the field where it is today. You know, I like to see anecdotes in there. I like people to talk about experiments that they did that surprised them. It's a way of presenting science as an engaging human activity, in the same way as, you know, if you were writing about how you did a painting, you would put some of your personality into it. I really like the idea of people including a bit of themselves and a bit of their character in their writing, and reviews are a chance to do that.
One of my first papers was, I was fortunate enough to publish one of my first articles as a PhD student in annual reviews in 2002.
Oh,
it was incredible because I worked with a senior guy in Los Angeles when I was working on my postdoc, like just after my PhD. We got a paper, he got invited to write a review paper for annual reviews. He asked me to join him, and it is my most highly cited paper in my career. So, you know, and you know, just an incredible experience. Our Chinese colleagues listening to this on Xiaotech should also feel free to ask Richard any questions. Just don't hold back. Feel free to ask questions. I have one from the Chinese audience, if I can read it. Just, if other researchers have studied and published a research issue a few years ago, under what circumstances can we write a review of that issue? How to better innovate in a narrative review?
Well, you know, you want there to be a body of new work that you cover, but of course you want to put that work in historical context, and you want to look backwards, but you also want to look forwards. So if you've got some interesting ideas that integrate information that's been published recently, then that's the right time to write a review. Also, lots of the progress in science takes place at the interface between two different fields. That's where you often see new ideas emerging, and reviews that help to cover those interfaces, I think, are really interesting and important. But reviews can fulfill all kinds of functions, from a quick and short summary of 3 or 4 papers, right through to a survey that covers a decade worth of work. It just depends on what your interest is and what you see as the opportunity at any given time. And it might be aimed largely at the people in your field, or it might be aimed at people who are developing policy of all different kinds, or it might be useful for practitioners. It might be of interest to the biotechnology community, or people developing new energy strategies, things like that. You might want to translate what's happening in basic research. Let's say you work on new forms of batteries. You might want to make that kind of science available to people in the energy industry. So doing a review that covers the scientific literature would be one way of doing that. It just depends on what your target is and what your goal is.
I'm going to ask one more from China, and then Ning's going to jump in because he's going to do a little bit of translation for our Chinese colleagues. The question is, and I've gotten this from our other colleagues around the world, you don't accept direct submissions for reviews at annual reviews, or how does that process work?
So we don't accept full manuscripts.
Okay.
What we do is we accept proposals. So if someone is interested in writing a review article, if they plan out what they think they would like to write about, and send, let's say, a 2-page outline that has section headings and maybe a sentence or two saying what each section would cover, and a cover letter explaining why this is a good time to write this particular review and what the author's contribution to the field has been. And you can send that to me. I don't make the decision on those. They're made by the editorial committees, but we can get the editorial committees to look at those proposals, and they're considered at the meetings of the editorial committees. So the editorial committee meetings, everybody, all the people on the committee put their ideas into a big database, and all the volunteers, we call them volunteer authors, their information goes into that database as well. And then the committee simply goes through all of the ideas and discusses each one and selects the ones that they think are the most vital in any given year. So that's how it works for us. But for other journals, you can submit a review, a fully written review. For others still, for Science and Nature, that's probably not the right way to proceed. Again, I would contact an editor there. But the important thing is to find out which each journal wants you to do, and then follow their instructions.
Right. We always recommend authors have a journal in mind before they
Right,
start
exactly.
making a submission. And we have a question here that's a common question for young researchers, really. Like, how do we know that we're qualified to write a review? How do you know that you're at the stage in your career where you should be thinking about doing this? And this is a common area of confusion also for our younger colleagues, because people often say, I've written a literature review for my PhD thesis or my master's thesis. Can I submit that to a journal as a review article? And we're talking about two different kinds of research.
You certainly could, you certainly could adapt a thesis introduction to become a literature review. I think what is lacking if you do a review at that early stage in your career is this additional contribution that comes from experience in the field, that comes from you being a real expert and having developed a strong point of view and strong opinions about where the field is going. And a lot of the benefit of the review comes from the person that's giving you the information is filtering it through their experiences and their opinions. Now that might sound quite surprising because you would want reviews to be unbiased. I think that it's arguable that science is never unbiased. We are always, since it's a human activity, we bring all of our experience, all of our preferences, all of our points of view to the science that we do. That's how we select our science and the type of experiments that we do. We have to recognize that and acknowledge it, but we also have to use it. We have to use our insights and our experience to try to interpret the work in a way that is really helpful. And that's easier to do if you've got 4, 5, 6 years of experience behind you, I think, rather than if you're just fresh from your PhD thesis. Where you can contribute is if you've got a senior colleague, you can, as you did yourself, Gareth, you just described that you co-authored an article. I think that's a good, it's a good learning experience. I'm sure you contributed enormously because you're probably more up to date with the literature than your boss. And I'm sure you contributed a lot of the frontline information, but that other more experienced person contributed something as well, and that was the benefit of their view of the science. So actually, the combination of a young, eager, very well-informed researcher with someone who's got more experience and adds a different type of contribution to the article is probably the best combination. And we often see that.
Yeah, it changed my career, I must say. Like, it was a very good start to my academic career. My supervisor in Bristol when I was doing my PhD used to say, write 5 papers and then write a review paper, and then write 5 more papers and then write a review paper. And that's what his advice was. Ning is going to jump in now so that we can make some translations of the questions that have been asked and answered so far. Ning, are you there?
Yes, yeah. Thank you, Richard. So, yeah, we will encourage Chinese audiences. They can ask some questions. Or I will speak in Chinese. 中国的听众，小额通的听众，咱们可以提一些问题。如果你们有那个问题的话，然后你们就可以提出来，然后我们会转达给Richard. Thank you. Okay, you can take over, Gareth.
Okay, there I am. I'm back. So how long does it usually take then for an article once submitted to annual reviews to get published? You mentioned that it's a year that you give authors to.
Well, once we commission it, we give them a year to write it, and it doesn't necessarily take a year, but if you want to get onto somebody's schedule, you have to give them a sense that you're not presenting them with this huge immediate problem to write a review article. So we say, look, agree to this. You don't have to give it to us for 12 months. And that helps people to agree because it's quite a big task. It might be 3 months worth of work. So let's say they take 3 months to write it and then they send it to us. We actually publish it reasonably quickly. We have no objections to people putting their review article drafts on preprint servers. We ourselves will put it online before it's fully accepted. So the turnaround time from submission is pretty short, but that period that we give to prepare the article is rather long. Mm-hmm. So we work on a different time scale. We're not trying to be immediate, at least at annual reviews. What we want to be is as close to definitive as we can be. So for instance, when 4 or 5 years ago, there was an Ebola outbreak in West Africa. It was a huge deal. And I remember the first year after it had happened, we had a meeting of the annual review of virology committee, and they talked about this very interesting Ebola outbreak. Should we have a review on it? No, because we don't have all the genotyping data from the viral outbreak yet. We come back next year. Well, we have all the genotyping data, but we don't have all the public health data, so we didn't do it that year. The next year, we didn't have all the immunology data. So they waited until they could write something. They waited until 3 years after the outbreak so that they could pull together all of the genetics, all of the transmission data, all of the immunology, all of the public health, all of the economic impact, so that they could write something that really gave a full overview of what happened in that outbreak. So we're, at least at annual reviews, we're not trying to, we don't publish an awful lot so far, for instance, on the COVID-19 pandemic. We are publishing on the coronavirus, its structure, replication of the virus, what we know about immune responses to coronaviruses. But our full coverage of COVID-19 won't happen for 2 or 3, 4 years down the line. And that information will be useful for the next 20 years whenever there's similar types of outbreaks.
Yeah, it's important. You really want your reviews to be definitive and to stand the test of time. I know the one that we wrote back in 2002 is still getting a decent number of citations every year. So, I mean, since this is peer review week, let me ask you a few questions about peer review. I mean, annual reviews is a journal that uses peer review, of course, but what kind of peer review are you favoring? Blind peer review, or will the authors know the identity of their reviewers?
So it depends. I mean, the most important type of review that we have is that it's peer invited. So even before the article is written, we've already selected someone who's very qualified to write, and they've explained what they're going to write. So it's not like the article comes into us and it's the first we've seen of it or heard about it. We're asking them. It's an invitational process rather than a submission process. When we get it, the articles are assigned to an expert in the field in the same way as any other article would be. They're not I guess they're blinded, but you can often work out who the reviewer is if you really want to. Usually we publish the articles with revisions. It's rare for us to reject something outright. I'm not saying we never do it. We do it, and we do it in a harsh manner if we feel as if people are, sometimes people put themselves at the center of the field, and that's not appropriate. Sometimes they have skewed interpretations of work or insufficient breadth of coverage. And in those cases, we don't publish the article. But often we get, people are doing this because they want the review article to be useful. So they do a good job of it. And usually there's some kind of to and fro between the reviewer and the author to get it into really good shape. But no, we're not examining the materials or the methods or data transparency or statistics or anything like that. So it's a rather less contentious process than peer review of a primary research paper.
I'm just scrolling through the questions that we've been asked by our audience outside China, and I think that everything has been addressed more or less, like lots of questions that cover ground that we've already touched on in this discussion. So what we'll do is we'll make a Q&A document for everybody listening to this to send to you, so that you have like the questions that were asked and then also Richard's responses. Let me also say that everybody listening to this is going to get a recording of this presentation this evening as well. So you'll be able to listen back and have a look again. I don't know if you can quickly have a scan through the questions that have come in on the Zoom.
Sorry, Gareth. I have one question. So did you see the research in China is much better than before? Then maybe 20 years ago. So did you see the increase? I mean, the papers published in annual reviews increased.
Yeah, we're very keen to have representation from leading researchers from all parts of the world. And we're increasing the number of invitations to researchers in China. And we also have increased and will continue to increase the number of Chinese researchers that serve on our editorial committees. We're incredibly aware that Chinese science has improved dramatically and is very competitive now. And we want to reflect that. I mean, science is global, and it's our responsibility to find really good researchers from all different parts of the world and to have their perspectives. In some fields, that's very important. You know, as I was saying, it's environment and resources meeting today, and the perspective of an environmental scientist in Jakarta might be a bit different from an environmental scientist in Boston. And so we want to make sure that we capture the point of view of both groups, the importance of research to different parts of the world and on different levels. So absolutely, we're very keen on having further presence from China, from India, from other parts of the world that typically haven't been as well represented as you would like.
If they are interested, so they can email they can email, or they can just direct submit to annual reviews.
Sure, I included my email address and my Twitter handle on the last slide. People are welcome to contact me if they want to ask questions about reviews in general, if they want to propose a topic for one of our annual reviews. By all means, you can get in touch with me.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I also get some very specific question from Chinese audience. 一般5000字的中数需要多少篇参考文献？The question is for a review, the number of words is 5,000. How many reference required for this review? That's very specific question.
Yeah, you know, we have guidelines that vary between different journals. The Annual Review of Medicine does shorter reviews, and others, I'm trying to think of an example. Maybe Astronomy and Astrophysics does ones that are much longer. The number of references will really depend on how many references there are in how many papers there are on the subject. In biomedical research, there tends to be more papers per review because there are more articles being published. In some of the physical sciences subjects, nuclear and particle physics, for instance, there are huge teams doing the work. They tend to write fewer numbers of papers, longer papers, maybe more significant papers to their field, but certainly fewer of them. So you'll tend to see that a biomedical subject might have a couple of hundred references, and a physical sciences one less, maybe 80 references. We don't really have hard and fast rules on that because we want to capture as much of the primary literature, the relevant primary literature as possible. That's one of the values of the review, is that it pulls together as many of the primary papers as possible. So I'm sorry, I can't give, we don't have a formula that we use. It really depends on the subject that you're writing on.
Okay, thank you. 刚才 Richard 的回答是没有具体的要求，基本上是根据学科不同。生物医学那边可能需要的文章就多一些，然后物理学那一块可能需要的参考文献就少一些。 There's another question. Is the annual review of fluid mechanics. Do you just do you accept it? Again, it's do you accept the direct submission, and do you have some requirement on their title, something like that? If you are
no, just the same advice as for all of the reviews. If you would like to write, the best approach is to prepare a proposal that might take you, I don't know, a couple of days to write, where you think through what your subject is, why you think it's important to review it right now, and then give a maybe 2-page outline of how you would propose the review to be organized. And then we'll have that considered by the editorial committee when they have their meeting.
OK， 那我简单翻译一下，就是annual review 他们希望，如果你有什么想法，你可以写一个2页纸的一个 proposal， 然后直接发给editorial team， 然后他们就会评价你这个这个题材，然后是否是值得写。然后如果不值得写，他们可能就直接就告诉你了；如果值得写的话，你就可以写了。Okay, so well, there annual. What is oh, another question. I think this question is important. If the reference is the newer, the better. If the reference, I mean, the question is about a reference. If it's they are the newer, the better. That you understand what I mean?
Sure. I would say it's important that the references are comprehensive, because what's new today is going to be not new in 6 months' time. So does that mean that we need to have a new review article every 6 months? I don't think that's practical. What we want is to make sure that we include all the most important references, and make sure that we describe our best understanding of what all these many primary research articles tell us about the state of the field, what we think we know for sure, what we don't know for sure but we have suggestions of, and where we think that the research is going. So I think it's important to have up-to-date references, but that's not the only thing you need to do. They need to be seen in the context of the whole field and what we knew up until this point. You know, sometimes research that's published very recently turns out not to be completely correct. Sometimes it turns out to be completely wrong, of course, but that's less likely. Often at the very cutting edge, you're doing experiments which are open to interpretation one way or another, and the authors might choose to interpret one conclusion from a set of results, whereas the actual correct interpretation might be a different one. You can't really tell that if you're basing your analysis on just one data set. So I think it's important that reviews give solid information. I would rather read something that was more certain and less contemporary than be misled by a couple of outlying articles that are maybe perceived to be very exciting. That's the job of the primary research, is to explore the leading edge. The review really, I think, is to give us an overview of where things stand.
Thank you so much, Richard. I'm aware of the time. I'm just going to read a comment from one of our colleagues from India who says that he wishes the lecture was longer. I felt it was over too soon, and an in-depth lecture in the future would have been, will be much appreciated. I want to emphasize just how grateful we are to you for giving up your time to join us today, and how unique Annual Reviews is as a publishing company. You said yourself in your talk, it's not about money, it's about libraries, and it's about academics. And that is, take it from me, like almost completely unique in the publishing industry. So thank you again for joining us. I don't know if you want to say something, Ning, before we sign off this
Okay.
evening.
Yeah. 谢谢大家，thank you thank you Richard，thank you Gary，thank you 我们的听众 audience，our 我们未来还有4个讲座，然后明天是加拿大科学出版社，后天是 PLOS 出版社，然后星期4是美国心脏学会，星期5是美国是英国的 KABI， 然后我们十分感谢大家的参加，然后也十分希望这个周在未来的4场讲座当中，我们依然可以参加我们的讲座。Okay, thank you everyone. We will sign off here.
Great. Thanks very much, everyone.
Bye, Richard.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Appreciate.
Thanks. Welcome.